Hello and welcome to doing lots of tier lists. Today I'm doing the top 100 best anime tier list, which I believe is based on the top 100 on Mal with a few small alterations. I think franchises are condensed into one, if I remember correctly. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it with Shiro Bako. Also, I extended it. It was before it was like S through uh, D, I think. I did E and F so that there's a perfect, like C is the perfectly like middle of the road, and I have more options for stuff that I think is bad. Uh, Shirobako, I'd say that's a solid A. It's very great. I love all the characters. I love just the general attitude, and I tend to be drawn to shows about artists because, like, I am one. So it's just something that I'm inherently very interested in. And the whole thing just comes across as this huge passion project to anime from people who make anime and love anime. Like, it's just, you can feel the passion bleeding through the whole project. Everything, it's quite funny. The characters are delightful, and it has some really powerful emotional moments. Yeah, I love it. Wolf Children, also A tier. I am a big fan of Wolf Children. I watched it the first time, and then I rewatched it not that long ago, and I liked it even more than I did the first time, actually. I think a lot of the stuff that didn't stand out to me quite as much stood out even more on the second time around. Certain themes, the soundtrack is one of my favorite soundtracks of all time, by Takagi Masakatsu. I think he's a legend. I love his work. And this film in particular was what got me interested in his music and made me go listen through his entire catalog. Um, and I think it's still is probably the best work he's done, or at least among like the top three. It's pretty darn great on that front, and also you get Mamoru Hosoda's like really strong sense of framing and environment. And the show's it's just very heartfelt, compelling. There's like the reason it's not an S tier because I feel like it could have possibly been a 10 for me if there was just a couple scenes that I didn't think came across very well or weren't executed very well. There's a couple small like visual things where characters look kind of off, and I don't mean to be nitpicky, but if it takes me out of the experience, it takes me out of the experience, and that's why even though I really love it, I can't say like I wholeheartedly this is like a masterpiece. However, I do think After Story probably deserves S tier. It's been a while since I've watched Clannad or Clannad After Story, even though I find myself defending it quite often nowadays because I think it's become a little more accepted to for someone's hot take to be that they don't like Clannad. I feel like before it was more like everyone universally decided this was like the show, but nowadays it's not held to quite that high regard. It's still well loved, but it's not unusual to find someone with this on their list marked at like a 6 out of 10. And I've been meaning to revisit both of the seasons and to just see how I feel and if I still love it to maybe do a big video on it. But I just haven't gone around to doing that yet. And so I'm just basing this off of my memory that I felt like I really liked how they developed the characters' relationships. It felt very natural, and I think all the emotional beats landed. It's well directed, well animated. The soundtrack is great, obviously, quite iconic. Just like this is something that sticks with you. You remember it, and it's definitely left an extremely strong impact on just the anime community as a whole. Uh, I think this is Monogatari. It's a little small. Haven't seen that. Haikyuu. Also haven't seen. Gokes. Haven't seen. Spirited Away. S tier. I watched Spirited Away not that long ago when I was on a bit of a Ghibli kick. Ghibli kick. And I was watching through a bunch of their movies. There's still a couple I haven't seen, but in that spurt, I have now seen pretty much every major Studio Ghibli film, except for Spirited Away. Not Spirited Away, except for The Wind Rises. That's the one that I haven't seen. That's one of the bigger deal ones, like a Miyazaki one. But other than that, I've seen pretty much all of the mainline ones that most people will know of, and I just need to catch some of the ones that were done like from directors that only directed like one Ghibli film at all, and like one more Isao Takahata film with what's the name of it? I forget. It's the one with the raccoons. I'm blanking on the name of it. Not raccoons, Tanuki. Tanuki, sorry. But Spirited Away. So generally, I'd say I think Miyazaki is a very strong director. I think everything he does is quite good and strong and a solid great, but it's pretty rare that anything he does I really deeply resonates with me, that I think it's amazing, like an absolute gem. And Spirited Away is one of the cases where it does. Just everything clicks together. I love the main character. It's really a sort of experiential thing, because having only seen the film once, I wasn't really looking for themes or anything like that. I was just experiencing the movie and taking it in. And it's the pure experience of Spirited Away that I think does it for me better than any of the other ones. Like, there's a constant, continual flow of interesting visual ideas and like memorable characters. Like, every one of the side little spirits has their own extremely distinct design, personality, way that they move. Everything about it is just a complete joy, fascinating. I love her little the sound she makes. It's like wah or something like that when she falls. It happens quite a few times. It's pretty funny. Just as a whole, the film is just immensely enjoyable on like every second, and incredibly beautiful, and just the general design sense is fantastic. I just walked away from it thinking, yeah, like there was nothing that I disliked about this at all. Not a single thing that I could recall. So definitely pretty strong. Made in Abyss. I would put this in B tier. So Made in Abyss, I think, is pretty good. I like it, but I kind of found myself thinking that nothing about it really did a whole lot for me when it came to the characters. I think the world is interesting, and I think as like watching the story unfold as they go deeper and deeper is fun. But even at its like emotionally highest points, like the arcs were focusing on what's her name? Is it Nenechi? I'm forgetting, the furry one. Even at the heights of that, the most I felt was that it was like sad, but I never was too deeply invested in any of the cast. Nothing about their goals really resonates with me or is something that I relate to. This aspect of like she has to go in and has to find out and is motivated by this desire to explore is not something that clicks with me, or that I think is like that I understand, nor do I feel like the show presents it in a way that really brings you around to understanding her point of view, or at least does so to the degree that I would have wanted. So on that front, I can't say that like I really care that much about any of the characters, but I think the world is great. I think the characters are fun, even if they're not like, I'm not super like emotionally invested in their success. I think they are fun to watch, and I think the furry one definitely is the best character, largely because I recall the voice acting for her being particularly compelling. But yeah, that's my take on it. Also the soundtrack is definitely pretty darn phenomenal. That's something that cannot be denied. Sangatsu no Lion. So I would place this, I think, C tier. It's maybe low B tier, but because of the way this is structured, with less, diversity than comparing to on any list where I score on a 20-point scale. I think it is more sensible to place it in the C tier. And I feel this way because Sangatsu no Line is this. Did I just call it? Yeah, I did. I called it Sangatsu no Line. Blinken, You Were Lie in April. I was trying to call it by the Japanese name, but I'm forgetting what it is. Yeah. Oh, no, stop. I'm like trying to translate it myself instead of just remembering the title. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This Your Lie in April is a series that I am quite mixed on because there's things about it that I really like, but there's also things that I don't care for. The whole so like on what I like about it, I think that the soundtrack is definitely one of the best anime soundtracks I've seen, just across the board, not just the choice of classical pieces, which is in itself really really great, and the like recordings of them are also some pretty great performances. Like I feel on that front, it definitely captures everything it needed to, and then also the original pieces themselves match up as being pretty darn phenomenal as well. So like the soundtrack is really 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 good, and I love it, and I listen to it pretty frequently. Like I find myself revisiting the music to the show quite often. But when it comes to my issues, even though I was somewhat invested in the sort of emotional conflicts of the characters, I found multiple like various annoyances. The way the characters talk felt really unrealistic to me. I wasn't sold on their philosophical musings, or the whole aspect of him not being able to hear his notes. Though I've talked to a friend who says that it's not actually as unrealistic as people make it out to be, it seemed, yeah, it was pretty hard for me to believe it, and I feel like more so than necessarily it being something that can happen or not, the show makes no attempt to sell you on the fact that it can happen, which is what I think the deeper issue is, because there's nothing really wrong with presenting something that is inherently unrealistic or perhaps realistic but hard to believe, but you do need to sell your audience on the fact that this is something that makes sense to happen in the world. And to me, it really didn't make sense to me. And as such, every time it happened, I was kind of pulled out of the experience. And even further, I feel like it didn't contribute that much. Like, without him having that issue, you could have covered a lot of the same territory and had a lot of the same end results. I guess it was more of an aesthetic choice than anything, but for me, it felt like it was sacrificing my investment for an aesthetic image. And then also, I also feel like the series is kind of just a little too long. It's 24 episodes, but when it comes to the story itself and what happens with the characters, I do find myself thinking that this could have been a 12 episode show and covered pretty much all the same territory. It has been, like with a lot of these, a while since I've watched it, so I struggle to come up with any specific examples, but I do just generally recall the feeling that there were quite a few episodes that I felt like nothing really happened and left very little impression. Basically, most episodes where there is no musical performance in them is a good starting point. But that's my feelings on Your Lie in April. Rakugo Shinju. I watched the first episode of this. I thought it was pretty good, and never watched anymore. So I'm gonna have to put that in. Oh, I just realized I've been putting these in F. I haven't seen. There we go. I hope that didn't confuse anyone. Cowboy Bebop, I've seen, I think, 4 or 5 episodes, but I haven't finished it. Don't have a very strong opinion. Thought it was pretty good. Mushishi. This show, I'd say, is a solid A tier. it's really well crafted. The stories, it's highly episodic, which is why I find myself like watching this show for long stretches of time. I think I've seen uh, one of the OVAs and 2 seasons, if I remember right, or like the first season and a half and one of the OVAs, something like that. I definitely haven't seen all of the Mushishi there is, but it's one of those shows that's like you can watch literally any time. You're not going to miss much if you put it on hold for a while. It's always going to be there. It's just got really well constructed episodic stories that go into the psyche of like an individual person, and oftentimes beyond that, like an individual town. Like you get the sense for this entire mini town that he's visiting, this mini society, and how it functions, and it can go into various ways of how humans like interact with one another, and how that works because Ginkgo is this very sort of apathetic, or not necessarily apathetic, but very hard to read what his emotions are in any particular situation. So he's more of like a way through which to carry us through these locations, and a sort of tour guide, as it were. It's beautiful. I love the different like the different mushi and all the things they do. It's hard to say anything in particular, but everything about it is exceptionally well crafted, and I like a lot. So that's Mushishi. Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, a series I should watch but have not. Hajime no Ippo, I know Shaves like that show a lot. I'm definitely planning to check it out sometime. I haven't seen really any of Dazaki's work, though I have to say I have my doubts that it'll really appeal to me. It doesn't really look like my thing, but I'll definitely try it out eventually. JoJo, also I've not seen, also doesn't really look like my thing, but we'll try it out at some point. Okay, Rurouni Kenshin, haven't seen. Mononoke, this is A tier, definitely. I love this movie. It's pretty great. It looks phenomenal, as Ghibli movies tend to. Extremely memorable. Again, in this case, it's kind of a thing with Miyazaki movies where I don't really remember anything that specific about the characters, but it's more in the way they express themselves physically that you find yourself compelled. Like I can remember moments of her, but I couldn't really describe her to you or say anything about how I empathize too deeply with her. Another film that I've seen only once, but definitely would like to revisit to look a little bit into its themes of nature, because I feel like this particular movie has a much more nuanced take than many of the Miyazaki movies do that pertain to sort of like humanity and industrialization versus nature. So yeah, One Punch Man, I'd say definitely B tier. One Punch Man is a series that is very enjoyable. It is well animated. It is funny, and it's got some memorable moments. But and I do like one aspect of it in that it sort of like gets both sides of the coin, with it having these characters that are very conventional shonen characters, and it has this more, you know, conventional shonen narrative unfolding underneath Saitama. So you get this emotionality that it wouldn't have otherwise, but then that's often, you know, undercut, or, you know, it in turn makes the slapstick moments with Saitama even funnier. However, I find myself looking back on the series and thinking, man, not very much of that was all that memorable. And I can't say that aesthetically it's my favorite show visually. I think it's quite well animated, and I definitely rather watch that than the second season, on both fronts. But it doesn't speak to me on any particularly deep level. It just is a good show that is fun to watch, and I would definitely, you know, put it on with a friend who hasn't seen much anime. I think it is a pretty good starting point. Promised Neverland. I'm I'm gonna throw that in D for now. I might lower it. We'll see. Promised Neverland, I watched the first episode of, and well, at first I thought it was just okay. The more I think about it, the more I find myself disliking it. It's basically got every trope with characters that I really dislike. There's an entire sequence where the characters just literally explain their personalities to each other for no reason. They're just like, I'm the smart one. I'm, the outgoing one. I'm the one who plans. Like they just are explaining their characters as if we couldn't pick that up just based on looking at them and looking at the way they act and behave, which I find kind of insulting and really stupid, and it immediately makes me not care at all about any of the characters. In fact, I just found the whole cast generally quite annoying. I mean, that's kind of a tendency with child characters in general, but it's not like a child character has to be annoying. But in this case, it's not only that they have this aspect of they're so smart, but then also that their characters, like they're so archetypal and just frankly quite boring, while also being extremely vocal, particularly with regards to the main character, that I just found them really obnoxious. And was thinking to myself, like, if I kept watching this, it would just be to see characters die, because I don't care about anyone. And like nothing else. I mean, the visuals are fine, but nothing about it appeals to me. I don't really remember the soundtrack at all, so I can't comment on that aspect. But and like with regards to tone, I thought the tone was pretty terrible. Like the extents to which they play up the happy section at the beginning, I felt like really took away from the impact of the darker moments later on, because it just made it seem farcical. So definitely not a big fan of that series. Granted, only watched the first episode, but I think it was enough to give me a pretty strong opinion on it. Fate, haven't seen. GTO, haven't seen. Howl's Moving Castle, I would put this in B tier. It's a good, fun movie. I liked it. I know a lot of people consider this one of the weaker Ghibli movies. I particularly really like the main character. I found her pretty appealing, and I like that she's a little on the older side and more mature, compared to most Ghibli protagonists, which I thought was a nice change of pace. The way she expresses herself is very different, and it feels like something informed by a longer time spent on the earth. So I appreciated that, and I really like the design of the castle and the sort of like steampunkiness to it. But other than that, I can't say too much about it. Your Name, surprisingly, one of the only works by Makoto Shinkai that I have not seen. Natsume Yujincho, have not seen. Gurren Lagann, that gets an S tier, baby. In fact, let's put it right at the top of S tier. Gurren Lagann is brilliantly crafted. The first arc's great, the second arc's great. All the characters are great. It looks fantastic. The soundtrack is amazing. I love everything about it. The development is like really natural, but also has lots of surprises in it. The narrative itself keeps you engaged, while the thematic aspects are really compelling. The finale had me crying a lot. It's just everything about it is peak greatness. I don't think I need to explain why Gurren Lagann's good. Just go watch Nate's video. But yeah, love it. Disappearance, also S tier, great film. You literally like the reason I think it's like S tier, but when it comes to like ratings, I think I have it at like a 9.5 instead of a 10. Is that I do think, particularly on the rewatch, the first hour or so of the film is a little bit slow, because it's mostly like this build up. It's a lot of build up, and when you haven't seen it before, there's a lot of expectation, so like it works. But once you've seen it the first time, then you kind of know what's coming, and you're just sort of looking forward to getting to those moments, those scenes, the ones that you really remember. But other than that, you could not ask for a greater point with which to leave on when it comes to the Haruhi franchise. I love Haruhi in its entirety. I think all the characters are fantastic. It's got one of the greatest like dynamics. Everyone's super memorable, and this film is filled with memorable sequences. Um, uh, as much as I do get tired of Eric Satie's music being used everywhere, this film's use of Gymnopede 1 and 2 and 3, I think, also is pretty great. It is long, but it really creates this sense of like, wow, we really went somewhere. And especially the payoff with like aspects from the Endless Eight, and just the general catharsis of it, when in the context of the full series, makes it just the perfect love letter to fans of the series. Just a thoroughly fantastic film. My Hero Academia. I have not seen it. I'm currently reading the manga. It's pretty enjoyable. Nothing spectacular, but I like it. Monster. I read the manga. The manga is fantastic, but I haven't seen the anime. Death Note. Haven't seen. Bakuman. Also read the manga. Pretty great manga, but has some flaws. This I'm gonna put in haven't seen. I watched like the first 8 minutes, I think, and didn't like it, so I dropped it. Usually I don't drop movies, but like it didn't really like the look of it, and if I don't like looking at it and I don't like the characters of the story, I'm not grabbed by it, then I'm not gonna bother. I don't recognize this at all. Like I literally can't make out what this is. Like I'm not sure, but that definitely means I haven't seen it. So, yeah. Sora Yori. I'm gonna have to put this in D. So I know a lot of people really love Sora Yori, um, uh, but I am not one of them. I watched the first episode or two, I think, and initially I dropped it, but people kept praising it, and I think it was listed as one of the nominees for Best Soundtrack, which was the category that I was coming on as a special guest for in the Art Anime Awards. And at the time, I was trying to watch through every show that had been nominated for Best Soundtrack. I definitely did not succeed, but among the shows I made it through were stuff like Megalobox, which I had initially dropped, and also Sora Yori, which I had initially dropped. While I didn't finish Sora Yori, I got significantly farther than I did the first time, and I think I dropped it around episode 8 was when I finally gave up. And my issues with Sora Yori run really deeply into the characters, and I should have known that it was, I mean, I did know, but I figured I would give it, really give it a try, but it just kept paying on the previous elements that I already knew I didn't like about it. It's not to say that I don't like melodrama, but rather that I don't like these characters. I don't find them interesting, or I really just, at its core, like the root issue of the series is that I'm not interested in what it has to say. This whole aspect of like wanting to be special, especially in the framework of like how this show presents it, is not something that I've ever experienced or value or think is interesting. Like I'm not opposed to experiences that I don't relate to if they're presented in a way that's interesting to me, but at least as far as this show presents it, it's not at all something that I find particularly interesting. All I can find myself thinking is that these characters are dumb, their problems are dumb, and they're annoying. The show is at its best when it's trying to be funny. I think when the characters are just being quirky and fun, it's enjoyable. But my issue is that the characters are just so stupid that I cannot take it seriously at all whenever it tries to be dramatic. And visually, it's good. Like, I think the animation is generally solid. The environments and the directing sense is usually pretty good. But I'm not a huge fan of the aesthetic. I really hate the white, white outlines around characters. That it's also in what's the name of that that show? Uh, uh, I can't remember. Skigakure. That's right. Um, that show also did it. I don't like it. I think it looks weird and not a fan of that. But other than that, like it's solid. The character designs are pretty okay. Uh, Soundtrack's mediocre though, and I don't like the yeah. It's just like the core of the show. Why people love it, I don't like, and because so much of the show focuses on that, I really just couldn't vibe with it. If it was mostly comedy, I would have been more into it. But every time it turned around back to the drama aspects, it just totally lost me. Steins Gate, I'd say this is between a B and an A. Because of the stuff I have in A right now, I'm gonna put it in B. I think Steins Gate is just a very well done, well crafted show. Like, the narrative unfolds in a really satisfying manner, and I think it pays off on itself well. But, like, thinking back to when I watched it, I can't say that I was ever, like, emotionally gripped. I think everything about it was good, but there was just something missing at the time that didn't fully click with me. So like I don't have a lot to say about Steins Gate other than I thought it was good. So that's kind of my take for now. Assassination Classroom. I watched the first episode, thought it was very boring. We'll probably give it a try again because people keep saying it's pretty darn good. I thought it was just I watched the first episode and I was like, oh, I get the joke. And I was figuring it would be one of those series where it's kind of like it has one joke that it just repeats constantly, so I didn't think it was worth my time. But from what I've heard, it is more than meets the eye, so I'll probably give it another shot at some point. Psyche K have not seen. Ping Pong goes in A tier. Great visuals, great characters. Again, a series that I can't make any too strong statements about it because I don't recall too much with regards to its writing or anything in that department. I just remember being really invested in it the whole way through, and I really like the way it's just done visually. It's very unique and interesting and pretty cool. Tatami Galaxy. This is S tier, baby. Tatami Galaxy is pretty much one of the most like just straight up perfect shows that I've ever seen. There's a lot of stuff that super deeply resonates with me, and that's why it's a 10. Tatami Galaxy is a 10 because there is almost nothing about it that I think it does bad. Like, everything is super well crafted and meticulously crafted. There is like no dialogue in the show that is pointless. Everything builds to the climax. There's and I say it this way because I've seen it twice. I rewatched it last summer, and that was when I did my music analysis video on it. Because I remembered like it was fading a little in my mind. I was like, is this really a 10? And then I rewatched it and I was like, oh yeah, that's why it's a 10. Because there's a section of episodes, I'd say maybe around like, I think it's around like the 6 through 8 or 7 through 9, something like that, where it starts to feel very repetitive. But the thing is, it uses that like repetitive feeling to create the greatest, like most euphoric, orgasmic conclusion that I've ever witnessed. Like, it ties up every single character arc, all the loose ends, everything about it comes together, and it's the greatest aha moment of all time when everything links together. It's done absolutely brilliantly. I could not have asked for more. Just everything about it is super well constructed and very tightly constructed. All the voice acting is great. I love Watashi, the main character. I also love Akashi and Jogasaki and Uzo. Like, everyone sticks with you because they're so like distinctive and unique and quirky. The sense of humor is really funny. The visual, like the aesthetic is great. The animation itself is great. The soundtrack is fantastic. Michiru Oshima pulling it out again. Just everything is done so well. More Ippo also have not seen. No Game No Life. I've seen a couple episodes, but I don't really have that strong of an opinion, so I'm gonna put it in haven't seen. Violet Evergarden. I'm gonna say that's A tier. I think Violet Evergarden. I know some people think it's boring, but for me, that really, I don't resonate with that opinion at all. I think Violet's a really interesting character, and I think the way they show her sort of emotional understanding is presented in a way that really makes sense and is very like natural. It's a very slow progression, but it definitely feels incremental. Like as she interacts with these people and sees their feelings and how it sort of brings that out of her in turn, it feels very much like you're taking these steps up the ladder, all to reach the final like conclusion where it's very extremely emotional. If I had to give like a criticism, I would say the action. What is it? It's like the heist episode or something, around like episode 10 or 11. I found that much weaker because I was more interested in it from like a character standpoint when she's going to these different places. And what we get is it's basically an episodic show in the sense that we're getting these individual stories of the different characters that she's writing the letters for, but also then we have this sort of under narrative that becomes the main narrative of Violet, because if you think of Violet just as like the main character who you're supposed to be solely invested in, you're looking at it wrong. Violet is sort of this through line that pulls us through, and we are through following the stories of these different people, watching Violet's emotional self be revealed. And I think it handles that really well, and does it in a very compelling way. There's a lot of episodes that really, got those old tear ducts swelling. So I think Violet Evergarden is pretty darn great. Dororo. I watched the first episode, thought it was pretty good, but it's not over, and also I haven't watched any more of it. Haven't seen that. Aria, is this the first season? I think it is. I'm not sure if I would put this in A tier or B tier, to be honest. It's been a while since I watched it, and I remember quite enjoying it, but I think like it's a very chill experience. And it's one that is very like you just lay back. Like I can't remember any particular issues with it, but it is a series that you don't feel all that motivated to watch generally, at least me personally. I definitely want to come back. I watched the first season and then a couple episodes of season 2, if I remember right. Maybe just the first season, even. I can't recall. I do remember like the Ara Ara gag I thought was a little tiresome. There's a lot of very repetitive jokes that I wasn't a big fan of. I think it's at its best when it's more like kind of this like restrained emotionality, with like panning over the world and some music, some emotional music. It's like very high B tier, like barely breaking into A tier. I would have to revisit it, and also like perhaps framing it in the context of the franchise as a whole would improve my opinion, but for now, based on my recollection, I'd say it's a B. Gintama, I struggled through 7 episodes. It wasn't funny and it was pretty unappealing visually. What is this show? I don't even recognize this. Does that say like Death Box or something on it? Yeah, I definitely haven't seen that. Kaguya-sama, that's a solid. I'd say that's high B tier. Kaguya-sama is very funny. It's got a great like directorial vision. I think it has peaks and valleys. Like there's definitely episodes that are a lot funnier than other episodes. But as someone who read the manga, that like really affects my perspective because I know that a lot of people the general complaint from the people who didn't like it I saw was that they were like, oh, it's not going to go anywhere. As someone who's read the manga, I know exactly where it's going to go, and I love how the characters develop and continually like get deeper and more nuanced, and they really sort of go into the emotion of the characters while still maintaining this romance comedy tone, but also it becomes quite different from what it starts off as. So for me, through that framework, I appreciate how it presents it a lot, and I think it definitely improves on the manga because the first arc or so of the manga is definitely the weakest section, and the way it took, I was expecting from A1 Pictures it to just be panel for panel as it typically is, but instead it went above and beyond, and created a really distinct personality to it that is its own thing. It feels like very much its own entity that has its own value, and I dig it. So Kaguya-sama, pretty great. Also very cute character designs. Erased. I guess I'd say that's E tier. Maybe D. I think I'm gonna lower Promise. I think Soriyori is definitely better than both of these shows. So yeah. Erased started off pretty good. I think the animation, like the general visual sense, is nice. It definitely is going for like a more sort of like filmic style, like very like I think it even pulls the whole having what's it called, having the black bars on the top come down sometimes, but it is definitely going for that style, and it is very fun at first, but as it continually unfurls, you kind of get the sense for where it's going, and you expect it to subvert your expectations, and then it subverts those expectations by not doing that. And I've just felt like the story kind of falls apart at the end. Like it does nothing that is like interesting with the characters. It felt like certain arcs just like they just stop instead of being resolved. The villain is super boring and just totally lame and a huge disappointment. Just generally, it felt like it kind of went nowhere and was pretty unfortunate in that regard. I can't quite make out this. I think that's Ergo Proxy, but I haven't seen it. Hotaru no Haka, Grave the Fireflies. I'm gonna have to put this in A tier. I think it's a really moving film, and while I rewatched it recently, and it definitely didn't affect me as much as the first time. Like the first time, I remember when I watched it, I found myself like I was crying uncontrollably. Second time, I didn't cry at all. And I noticed certain things. Like I think it's the directing is not as strong as some of Takahata's other films, and the voice acting in some cases leaves something to be directed. The Japanese voice acting, that is. I haven't even seen it dubbed, despite watching it twice. I watched it in Japanese both times. But there's just certain, like the delivery of certain lines just feels a bit awkward to me. But I can't help but really be in love with it, like what it does, and what it's saying, and also like how it affected me when I first watched it, which you'll hear more about in my video probably that will come out next month or maybe the month after that I'm currently writing. But yeah, that's Grave of the Fireflies. I think this is Slam Dunk, but I haven't seen it. Space Brothers, A tier. I love Space Brothers. Muta is such a great character. Granted, if I revisited it, I wonder if I would think it's as great, just because I do recall the visuals being a generally not amazing. And I wonder if, like, comparing it to the manga, because I have read I have read pretty far in the manga, but like I read it a decent bit after I'd already finished the whole anime. if I like compared them side by side, would the anime really offer enough to be worthwhile? I do recall the voice acting on Muta being really fun, and I like him specifically as a character. He's the main reason that I think the series works so well for me, just following his arc. And I think it's best watched in like segments, like binge an arc, take a break, binge an arc, because otherwise it does get a little tiresome. Um, and yeah, there's various aspects that I feel like if I came back to it, I might like it less. Like the fact that there's quite a bit of recap at the beginning of each episode. Granted, you can just skip that, so it doesn't make that much of an impression on me. I mostly dislike recap when it's done. Like they try and hide it. Like you have a whole episode that's like recap, but there's like 5 minutes of original scenes in it, so you have to watch it to get the original content. I hate stuff like that. Just put it somewhere I can skip it, please, please. But mainly the strength of Muta and following his arc is what made it something for me, and I think it just has a lot of very strong, memorable moments and quirky, fun, memorable characters. Is its strength. Like definitely the characters is what this show is about, and following their individual stories is what makes it so enjoyable. And I do like that it feels like it covers such a like wide territory, that you meet such a like vast array of characters, and everyone feels unique and like their own individual. I think this is like the music video thing. I'm not sure. I don't remember. Run with the Wind. Watched the first episode. Thought it was pretty good. Haven't gotten back to it. One Piece. I'm gonna put this in haven't seen. I watched 40 episodes of the anime back when I was first getting into anime. About I think that's about 4 or 5 years ago, when I first started watching anime, like as a like with the knowledge that it's anime. I was watching One Piece. I watched the first. Maybe it was more than 4. I think it was more than. It was like 60 episodes maybe. But considering the 900 plus episodes that are out now, I don't think ranking it would be. I'd be able to give it an adequate score. If I was ranking it based on just what I've seen, I would put it in B. I recall being quite emotionally compelled. I liked all the characters. I think the soundtrack is nice. Granted, the visuals are pretty dated, but as a narrative itself, I think it holds up. And particularly certain arcs, certain ways, I think the first arcs of the anime at least actually execute some stuff better than the manga did. There's aspects that are worse, like the Alabasta arc, because in the manga you read it so fast compared to the anime where it's multiple episodes that Luffy is just underwater and you're like, how is he not drowned yet? This seems pretty impossible. In the manga, it's not that long a period of time, so it's much more believable. But like Usopp's, specifically like Usopp's introduction, I think the like emotional rawness of it is much more impactful in the anime version than the manga, because you do get to spend a little bit more time there. But across the board, I just was like, I think the manga is more worth my time, so that's what I'm reading at the moment. Though I'm only like 100 and something chapters in, so not that far. Hunter x Hunter, a series that I definitely will watch soon, but have not seen yet. Maquia, A tier. A tier's pretty packed. Looks like I have pretty normie taste. Oh no, what will I do? Whatever will I do? I think Maquia is just really strong emotionally, and I resonate with what it has to say. I mean, if you care, just go watch my video on Maquia. It's like the most popular video that I've ever made to date, by a pretty wide margin. And yeah, I think the movie is beautiful. I love the character designs. I love the soundtrack. The setting is fantastic. There's like a few small complaints I have, but ultimately when I rewatched it, the small complaints were even less. Like, people say that you don't really get enough time with the characters, but I disagree. I think you get a perfectly adequate amount of time for their dynamic between Maquia and Ariel to be for me to be sold on it. And while the political thing is very much feels like it's happening in the background, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. There are certain aspects to it that it tries to like pay off on, but it doesn't feel like you really got enough setup to care that much. But overall, there's just moments in this film that really get me where it hurts, and yeah, big fan. Nice job, Okada. Speaking of nice job Okada, not so nice job Okada. This goes in D tier. Anohana is perfectly fine. Like, that is how I would describe it. I watched all 12 episodes. I sat through. It wasn't painful. It wasn't difficult. It was just fine. Like, it's crafted in a way that is perfectly watchable. But in the end, I felt pretty much nothing emotionally. I didn't care that much about any of the characters. I didn't think any of the characters were all that interesting. And I'm not really a fan of how it plops you right in the middle of the story. I think that can work, and it definitely has worked for me before. But in this sense, when it's trying to pull so hard at your heartstrings, I'm just left sitting there like, I don't even know who any of these characters are. Like, I barely know them as people, because we just start right at the, like, heart of the action right when it's going into it. I think it definitely does do some interesting things, like how people... I would definitely be interested in seeing like someone's thoughts on how it deals with like how it deals with like the way people grapple with tragedy and trauma. But overall, I just didn't care that much about it. This is, I forget what this is called. I have seen this on Mel quite a few times and have been planning to watch it for a while. Haven't seen this Kami-sama Hajimemashite series. I definitely want to check out because it's done by Akitaro Daichi, director of Tonkatsu DJ Akataro, Tokyo Renka Meiji, the original Fruits Basket, Now and Then Here and There. He seems to have a very interesting catalog, and I'd like to check out more of his work. I like what I've seen of him. I think I really liked Meiji Tokyo Renka from last season. That was my favorite show of the season. So definitely want to check it out. Nichijou, I think I'd say this is B tier. Like, it's I already talked about it in the cute girls doing cute things, so I'll be brief. But it's well done. It can be funny, but it's kind of hit or miss. So that's my take. Like, at its peaks, it's pretty great, but when it doesn't land, it's like kind of like, oh, watched the first episode of Bunny Girl, haven't come back to it. Food Wars, watched the first episode and thought, oh, this is gonna be the whole show. No thanks. Hellsing, haven't seen. Parasite, haven't seen. Haven't seen. Ginga Eiyu. Why am I remembering the Japanese title when the English one is so much more popular? Whatever, you know what it is. I don't recognize. I think that's Kuroku no Basuke. I can't quite tell, but I think that's what it is. Is this End of Eva? I believe this is End of Eva. Don't even need to explain why. Samurai Champloo. I've seen like 10 episodes, so I guess I can rank it. I would put this in B tier. It's pretty fun. It's got a nice soundtrack and nice characters, and just it's a good time, but didn't leave that strong of an impression on me, and obviously has not motivated me to finish the show, so that much can be said. Usagi Drop is definitely high A tier. I like the show a lot, and the reason that it's like the one reason it's not S is that there's a few like there's a few arcs that just go completely unresolved, unfortunately. Like overall, I think the whole like life goes on ending, which is often used for manga adaptations that are incomplete, is can often be quite unsatisfying. In Usagi Drop, I think it makes sense narratively because like the whole point is that this is just like a vignette into the characters' lives. It's not supposed to have like an ending. There is no real end goal of the series, but it does set up certain arcs that just don't get a resolution, which is kind of annoying. But other than that, I love the aesthetic. I think the directorial sense is great. I love Rin and Daikachi and watching their dynamic. Um, the soundtrack really pulls at my heartstrings. It's very simple but really well crafted. Just generally, it's a series that I love and would recommend to pretty much anyone. And if you mention the manga, I will end your life. Heck, I want to end my own life just by mentioning it. I hate the fact that people can, like, that's the only thing people know is like every time it's brought up, someone has to bring up the manga. Like, can we just, like, you don't have to mention it every time. You don't have to. It's not a requirement. The show's great. It works perfectly well as a standalone, if not for like a couple small flaws. But other than that, I love it. Don't recognize this. Haven't seen Nana. Cross game. I'm planning to see. Don't recognize. I'm also planning to watch, blanking on the name, Yu Yu Hakusho. Berserk, I'll probably read the manga. Sangatsu no Lion, I would put this in B tier. It's enjoyable, and I think it has definitely high points, but ultimately I found myself with a couple key issues. I think the shogi scenes are pretty boring and they don't like keep me engaged. I don't really know the rules of shogi, so I'm not interested on that front. It doesn't explain the rules, and I also don't think it presents it in a way that really keeps me engaged, as opposed to something like Chihaya Furu. Also, I don't like it when it's hyper lighthearted. I'm okay with extreme tone shifts, but extreme tone shifts can be kind of hit or miss for me. In the case of Sangatsu no Lion, I find them to be often more miss, because I just find it kind of annoying when it's trying to be super bubbly and happy. It's just annoying to me. When the cats are talking, I'm like, why are the cats talking? I hate this. Please kill me. But when it's a little more melodramatic or just quiets down for a moment, and like doesn't have people talking constantly, then it can be pretty darn great. And I do think the cast is strong, and like it is the soundtrack is pretty darn good. While I wouldn't say like the way it's directed is my favorite thing ever, I think it definitely does have a clear directorial vision to it, which is something that I strongly respect. Haven't seen this. Attack on Titan, I would put in B tier. I'm gonna like move these around. Attack on Titan is low B tier. It's just a enjoyable show. Like, it's got a well-crafted story that like pulls you from episode to episode. It is fun to watch, but I have little to say about it outside of that. Grand Blue, for the sake of having something in F tier, I'm gonna put it here because that show is visually pretty hideous. I think it's quite hideous. Nazca, this is between B tier and C tier. For the sake of having a hot take, I'm gonna put it in C tier. Outside of the environment, I don't think anything about this film is particularly appealing. I don't think the way it presents its theme is all that great. I think is her name Nazca? Is the main girl's name Nazca? Am I just forgetting? I think that's her name, right? I think she's just she's not a very interesting character. She's pretty boring. I don't like how they execute any of her like emotional beats. I don't think they're executed well. I found her to be a very dull character and not one that I was emotionally interested in on any front whatsoever. And considering the bulk of the film is like centered around her, that's a pretty big drawback. Baccano, have not seen. Barakamon, I'd say that's a high B tier, low A. I like how it depicts community quite a lot. I like Honda as a main character. There's a couple side characters that I find kind of obnoxious. Not the kids, it's the middle school girls. I can't remember the names. But across the board, I think the best part of it is how it depicts this sensation of like a living like community that all comes together and helps each other out. It's really nice and I appreciate it. Chihaya Furu is A tier. I love this, maybe even S tier. Potentially S tier. Let's say. I kind of want to rewatch through the whole thing. I rewatched I watched it a while ago. Then I rewatched through, I think, the first half of the first season. And then I made my Taichi Fear failure video, but I never got around to finishing my rewatch. Season 3 is coming, so I might end up rewatching both seasons. I just love it. I love the manga. I love the anime. I think the anime is super. It's just visually, it looks great. The soundtrack is great. The characters are great. The like Karuta sequences themselves have this really really great like heightened sense to them, where it's like it gets quiet and you just start listening to the poetry. It captures a very unique atmosphere that is super compelling, like that it gets you so engaged in it, and that the Karuta matches, something you would think of as kind of boring, is so exciting, and it goes out of its way to get you interested in this game and show you why it's engaging. And then also it has this running aspect of sort of like talent versus hard work in Taichi and Chihaya herself. And on top of that, there's also, the characters on the side who also have their own little things going on. But yeah, I love it. It's great. Solid, very strong series. Hoseki no Kuni. B A B A B A. I'd say A. I'd say A. I really like Fos. The series is beautiful. I think it was definitely the best looking show the year it came out in. And I think the way it utilizes its camera work is pretty fantastic. And just across the board, it is a really great looking show. Like, I don't like that when people say it's like, oh, this is like good for CG, or like this is like CG can look good. No, this show just looks good. Like, it looks fantastic. And that's one of the biggest reasons that I like it. As I think as a visual experience, it really pulls you along in a very compelling manner. Madoka Rebellion. I haven't seen any of the Madoka movies at all, actually. Bakemono no Ko. I have not seen that. I think this is Mononoke, which I've been meaning to see. Koi no Katachi. I'd say that's A. I have a few issues with how it handles certain things, but I think the main dynamic between Shoko and Nishimiya, it's Nishimiya, is so immensely compelling that it's like hard to hate. It's hard to hate anything about it, because the levels to which that singular relationship pulled me is pretty intense. I'm kind of rushing through because this is going on for far too long. Shiden Sakai no Yori, haven't seen it and don't have no interest in seeing it. Psycho-Pass, definitely plan to. I think I can't recognize this, so obviously I haven't seen it. Totoro, I'd say that's high B tier. Again, very fun. I like it a lot. But it didn't leave that much of an impression on me, at least when I watched it. Totoro. Like, I remember the ending theme. I remember Cat Bus. I remember just enjoying it from start to finish, but it didn't leave a super hard impact on me. Definitely have not seen this or this. What is this? Like, this does not look like something that would be in the top 100 on Mal. It looks like an old, it looks like one of the World Masterpiece Theater shows, but I definitely don't recognize it at all. It looks kind of like, is that like 3,000 Leagues Under the Sea or something? I'm not sure, but I'll have to check. That looks intriguing. Kids on the Slope. I'd say A tier. Maybe high B tier. But I revisited this. This is another series I revisited last summer. That I also liked even more the second time I came around to it. I think the musical sequences are really, really well integrated into how they develop the characters. I like all the characters. Ultimately, I think the biggest issue is that I felt like the ending is a little unsatisfying. Even though, like, the final scene is super satisfying and extremely cathartic. But then you, finish the show and you're thinking about it and you're like, there's just a couple things I would like to see wrapped up. And so my recommendation to everyone, whenever they say they're watching the show or have seen it, is just go read the epilogue. It's like the last chapter of the manga. You can find it easily online. It makes it, for me, much more satisfying. But other than that, I really like the way it handles things. It looks great. The soundtrack is fantastic. And like even though it's pretty melodramatic, it didn't bother me. Like all of it definitely worked. Mob Psycho 100, AT, is it a? I'd say B. I like a lot of things about it. I like what it has to say. I like the characters, but I don't love the characters. I don't necessarily love what it has to say. I think that's the problem. Is that's the core difference between something that's like B and A tier. Is just like the degree to which it like has resonated with me. Either it was like a well-crafted show that I thought was enjoyable, or it's something that actually like really stuck with me and made an impression on me on a personal level. Like, so that's my feelings. I think it looks good. It's a solid show, but can't say I have much interest at all in ever rewatching it. Spice and Wolf, great show. Hollow is just the fact that this show has Hollow makes it A tier. I don't think I need to say much more than that. And that is 100 best anime tier list. I hope you enjoyed the video. Tell me if there's different tier lists you'd like to see me do, or different videos you'd like to see me do. Let me know in the comments. Peace.